Welcome to Populations. I'm Jim Winkle. 1 billion plastic checkout bags are used every year in Oregon. These bags are practical because they're cheap and durable, but also end up littering our roads, beaches, and waterways. A bill in the state Senate would outlaw single-use plastic bags from retail stores and require shoppers to pay a nickel to reimburse the store for using a paper bag. Would this bill set a new environmental milestone in Oregon, or is it just an unnecessary nuisance for grocery shoppers? Joining us today are two guests. Gus Gates is Oregon Policy Manager for the Surfrider Foundation, a coastal conservation organization dedicated to the, quote, protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches. Welcome, Gus.
Thank you.
Todd Wynn is Vice President of the Cascade Policy Institute, an Oregon research and educational organization whose mission is to promote alternatives that, quote, foster individual liberty, personal responsibility, and economic opportunity. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Gus, let's start off with asking you to just kind of summarize why your organization is for this bill. In particular, what is the environmental impact of plastic bags in Oregon?
Well, we've been active on this issue for a number of years, starting with our Portland chapter here. And for us, we do a lot of river and beach and highway cleanups, and consistently plastic bags, especially single-use plastic bags, are one of the main items that we consistently find in our cleanups. They make their way into the storm drains, out the rivers, and ultimately end up in the ocean. And it's a big concern because these plastic bags can entangle marine wildlife, such as marine mammals, seabirds, and then ultimately the plastic never biodegrades. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller bits. And so at the bottom of the food chain in the ocean are forage fish who can consume these bits of plastic, and then that works its way up the food chain and ultimately back to us. And so that's a big concern for us. Roughly 80% of the plastic that is found in the ocean comes from land-based sources. So for us, that translates to the need to change our behaviors on land.
So plastic doesn't really decompose, and it ends up in the ocean because it goes down storm drains in the city and then ends up washing out to the beaches. Mm-hmm. Okay. Todd, sounds like a big littering problem. What's the deal with the bill? Why are you guys against it?
I think that you hit the nail on the head using the word littering. It's not that plastic bags exist, it's that they're actually littered, that they end up in the streets and the roadways and the waterways. And what's interesting, what Gus had brought up, that he finds a majority of the trash. Well, has been plastic bags. There's been a lot of litter audits done around the United States, San Francisco, Florida, Toronto, and other places that have shown that solid waste, plastic bags only make up a little less than 1% of that solid waste. And a oceanographer from the Oregon State University actually came out recently and said that the amount of plastic in the ocean has not increased since the 1980s. And even a Greenpeace person came out, it was a Greenpeace marine biologist, said that plastic bags are not the major problem affecting sea life out there, that it happens to be fishing gear for the most part, human-made problems with sea life. And this is probably on the lowest priority as far as Oregonians are concerned. When 1 in 5 Oregonians are on food stamps, we see 10.4% unemployment in the state. Banning of plastic bags is not the right time.
Gus?
Actually, I'm glad that Todd brought up that point about the volume of trash that's found. Actually, Solve has done some really good work here in Oregon in the beach cleanups that are conducted. And they've actually found that 12% of the materials that are collected off the beaches is single-use plastic checkout bags. So, it's something that Oregonians see in their everyday lives, whether it's along the roadway, it's in the rivers, or along the beaches. And I would agree that, there are some litter issues. However, I think that most Oregonians pride themselves in their environmental stewardship and do not deliberately litter. These things, because of the way that they're made in such lightweight materials, that they fly out of the back of the truck, they take off out of your curbside recycling materials, and they end up ultimately in the street making their way out to the ocean. And I'm glad you brought up the study from the Oregon State University researcher Angel White. As a OSU alumni myself, I think she raised some pretty significant things. And I think there's a key take-home message in that plastic does not belong in the ocean. And it's in every ocean around the world. consistently. So, we can debate about the size of that, but the fact of the matter is, it's a concern. It doesn't belong there.
Now, when you're talking about 12%, let's say that figure is correct. That means 88% of the rest of GAR is something else. Or is the next bill that Surfrider is going to propose or support is banning all sorts of other trash?
Well, we're focused on single-use plastic checkout bags right now because that is a pretty significant component, and it's something that really we as Oregonians, with just a simple change in our behaviors, can make a meaningful impact collectively. It's really pretty simple to bring a reusable bag to the grocery store, reduce our consumption, reuse that material over and over again.
Yeah, Todd, what about that argument? I mean, isn't it pretty simple just to reuse your own bag? People used to do that before the advent of single-use plastic bags.
What we've seen with plastic bags, we've seen recycling rates double since 2005. We've seen in the past, I would say 10 years or so, significant amount of consumers moving towards paper alternatives, paper versus plastic, and even towards reusable bags as well. In fact, I even use a reusable bag myself. So
wait, hold that up so that we can see the message on there. My reusable bag makes me better than you. Okay.
I use reusable bags myself, and I think that, and ultimately, I'd like to give some credit to environmental organizations that play a great role in convincing Oregonians and consumers around the United States to use alternatives voluntarily. And I think it is a simple solution. And a simple solution and convincing Oregonians to do these sorts of changes voluntarily is the right way to go, not lobbying government to impose force to change the way people behave in society. Voluntarily winning hearts and minds is the way to change.
I'm glad you brought up the recycling point because I think that that's an important one to consider, and recall that it is a three-step process: reduce, reuse, and then ultimately, as a last resort, recycle. You mentioned doubling recycle rates over the last 5 years. However, it's important to know that according to the EPA, there was roughly 3.9 million pounds of plastic waste generated. So plastic films, plastic bags, of that, about 9.4%. So 4.7 times 2, 9.4. We've still got a long ways to go. And ultimately, the biggest challenge to full recycling of that is because of the market impacts. The market is not conducive to recycling this plastic. It just doesn't pencil out.
What about Todd's point that we should be trying to convince or educate people to keep care of their plastic bags and not litter rather than impose a
Absolutely.
government ban?
I mean, that's something that we've been doing all along, educating people about where that plastic ultimately ends up, encouraging people to bring their own reusable bag, reuse it over and over again. So yes, absolutely. That comes with the stewardship ethic that we all have as Oregonians, and we've been talking about this for a really long time. Down in California, where I know you're originally from, Todd, about 5 years ago they passed a assembly bill called 2449, which basically mandated to increase recycling in grocery stores and in California. And here we are 5 years later, and still only a tiny fraction of single-use plastic bags are actually being recycled. So
in California.
In California. And so I think that learning from that lesson, we can do things the Oregon way and recognize that, we probably don't really need these that much. Really, it makes a lot more sense just to bring our own reusable bag.
Todd, so you're against the principle, really, of government banning something that consumers may choose to use or grocery stores may choose to give to consumers. But is this kind of a fair analogy to the bottle bill that's been in Oregon a long time? Another government, I suppose, intervention, but is largely seen as a success environmentally and for grocers, I suppose.
That was brought up in the hearing that was surrounding the Senate bill that's been proposed. And they were comparing this to the bottle bill. And I'll have to say outright with some pretty harsh honesty that these are completely uncomparable bills as far as I'm concerned, incomparable bills. The bottle bill, it has a fee attached to it that can be brought back once you bring your bottles back. This is an outright ban on a product. We didn't outright ban glass bottles or aluminum cans with the bottle bill. But this one not only outright bans a product out of the marketplace entirely, but then poses a price, a government-imposed price, on the alternative. This has no comparison whatsoever to the bottle bill in any way.
No comparison?
Well, I would agree that there are some significant differences. As you mentioned, glass, aluminum, and plastic containers can be readily recycled a lot more easier than an item such as single-use plastic checkout bags. So there's some inherent differences with those. At the time, in the early 1970s, Oregon was the first state in the country that passed the bottle bill. And, I wasn't alive back then. But it was, somewhat of a watershed moment for Oregon in that, we really recognize that we've got some problems here and we live in a beautiful state and we're trashing it. We need to clean up our act. And that was one way that really encouraged folks to recycle these materials. So here we are, 40 years later, roughly. Many counties, cities, even countries around the world have banned single-use plastic bags because of the environmental impacts and the economic impacts as well. And Oregon does have an opportunity right now before the state legislature to be the first state in the country to ban single-use plastic bags and address this waste stream that is a very chronic source of plastic pollution in the environment, as well as some very significant economic impacts.
I guess adding a deposit might not work with plastic bags in the same way that bottles does. You can't return it to be reused, partly because it can't be recycled yet as easily as glass, as I'm assuming, and aluminum.
Yeah.
But Todd, back to your point about the government's role in this. I mean, the state already plays a role in grocery stores, for example, when it comes to setting a minimum wage, workplace safety standards. The products on the shelves have to meet FDA requirements for food safety. There's already that principle at work in a lot of ways in retail stores. Do you think this bag ban, though, is different from that principle?
I do, and I think there's two issues to this bill. One of them is the outright consumer ban on a product, which I do not feel is the proper role of government. And the other one is, you could say it's a tax, a fee, I'm sure we'll define that, a charge. But what I see it as is a government-imposed price on a product. The government is saying, and politicians in Salem are saying, that grocery stores, you have to charge a minimum price for a product, which opens up a dangerous precedent for the role and power of government in Oregon. If we allow government to impose a minimum price upon a product, then what's to say they can't impose a minimum price on other products? What's to say that they can't impose prices on any products, whether that be fast food packaging, coffee cups, anything you can possibly think of? And then if they can do that, what's to say they can't impose a maximum price? If everybody in Oregon would be better off consuming a banana every day, and the government said, well, let's make a price at 1 cent per banana, well, that's very similar, eerily similar, to Cuba and the former Soviet Union. And I don't think that worked out too well. So when we allow government to do this, and we say that this is acceptable role of government, we're opening up the doors for government to do more of this, and that is much more dangerous than any plastic bags littering on the roadway.
So do you think this falls in between the government's role for setting minimum wage and workplace standards, but on the other hand, it's not yet as extreme, but could be one day for taxing bananas and coffee cups? Is it somewhere in between?
There's only, because workplace standards is a different issue, but minimum wage is the only example that's out there where government can set a price, or in this case, a wage. And there's many arguments against minimum wage. We'd need another show for that.
Well, let's go to the tax, since you brought that up. The Legislative Council, which I suppose is legal advice that the House and the Senate gets, looked at this issue and informally, at least constitutionally, defined it as not a tax. The two reasons they gave were, one, the revenue that comes from a consumer paying a nickel for using a paper bag does not go to the general fund. And the other reason they gave is that when you pay that nickel, you get immediately a tangible direct benefit of it, which is the paper bag. So they did not call it a tax. Also, if something's a tax, you have to get 2/3 of each chamber to pass the measure before it goes into law. Todd, do you accept that argument?
You know, I think that it was written in a certain way by the sponsors of the bill so that it wouldn't have to get that extra amount of votes, particularly because the numbers have evened up, Republican versus Democrat, down in the legislature down there. So it was a clever move. I was surprised by the move because ultimately I figured that politicians would probably want that revenue to support some sort of government program. But I think that they have a point that it may, I think, legally not be considered a tax. But then again, I don't see it as a charge. I don't see it as a fee. I see it as a government-imposed price. I think that's the proper definition of it.
Government-imposed price?
Well, I see it as a charge personally, and the reason why I see it that is because you have a choice on whether you want to pay that or not. You can bring your own reusable bag. You could bring a recycled cardboard box if you wanted to. You might shop at Costco now and then. Folks probably know that they don't provide any bags. They seem to be doing just fine. So, we as consumers have multiple choices in our daily lives. When we go to the grocery store, it's not something that you are forced to pay.
Well, apparently we are being forced to not be able to purchase plastic bags. So it is eliminating choice in many factors. And then also, the definition of a charge or a fee is on top of the price of a product. This is actually establishing a price for paper bags. It's not saying paper bags currently cost you 5 cents and we're going to tack on 2 cents for the environmental impact that paper bags happen to have. They are saying retail stores are forced to charge a minimum price for 5 cents a bag. That is a government-imposed minimum price. There's nothing else. I mean, that's as simple as I can say it.
It is government imposed, but on the other hand, the Oregon Grocers Association, or whatever they're called, is for this bill. How do you explain that?
Well, it's interesting that the Grocery Association, at first I was surprised by it. Then I thought a little bit more. Well, for the most part, the price of these bags is embedded into the cost of your groceries. So when you buy eggs, there's a little bit in there that covers the price of the bags currently. So adding a government-imposed price on top of that will add to actually some revenues for the Grocers Association. But I think that's on a minor level because, we'll explain later that actually this is going to decrease Oregonians' disposable income to purchase goods, which may end up hurting the grocers more than helping them. But as far as the price is concerned, what was the question? What are we even talking about?
Boy, I lost track now.
I did too.
We talked about the tax.
Well, I can chime in here real quick.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned the grocers and their support
Grocers
as well.
Oh, grocers.
They support it.
But one thing I also wanted to mention as well is in addition to reaching out to our members and citizens of the state of Oregon and encouraging them to use reusable bags, we've also gone to over 500 businesses. And right now, currently, there's over 500 businesses from across this great state of Oregon who are supporting this effort, in addition to the Grocers Association. I think that's important to recognize. And in addition to that, there's been 7 communities that have all passed resolutions supporting this statewide legislation. So the city of Portland, the city of Newport, the city of Cannon Beach, city of Tillamook, city of Beaverton, city of Lake Oswego, and the Metro Regional Government. So there's a lot of momentum that's supporting this effort across the state.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do feel that if a private business wants to ban the bag within their store limits, according to consumer demand or just because of the store's prerogative, then I think that's a perfect solution to responding to Oregonians' demands and desires. In the Portland area, if the majority of consumers that shop at Fred Meyer or some other store don't want to use plastic bags, then they can stop using them at the store. They can stop providing them at the store, and I think that's one solution. Back to the Grocery Association, I know that their stated support for it was mainly because they don't want to see this patchwork of regulations, bans, taxes, fees, government-imposed prices on the county, city, all across the state of Oregon, and that'll add to some of their costs as well. So I believe, this is my opinion, the Grocery Association has rolled over on the issue and would rather want a standard, Oregon state standard on this in order to hopefully save them a little bit of money in the long run, because I do think that they see this coming through on the city and county level.
And isn't that a natural incentive? After all, their businesses, so if it works better for their bottom line, they'll be supporting it. But you said, businesses have the choice to ban plastic bags if they want to do it. On the other hand, it might be in their best interest for their bottom line to offer a very cheap, very durable plastic bag that costs them a penny rather than a paper bag, which may cost 4 cents. So someone's private financial interest may conflict with maybe the public interest of keeping this stuff out of our beaches. So maybe that then is appropriate then for the government to come in and set a law like this.
It comes back to that same argument that it's not that plastic bags exist, it's that they're being littered in mostly common property, which is public property. Okay? This doesn't really happen in private property. It happens on beaches, it happens on roadways, it happens in waterways, all public property. So the concept comes back to not that these bags exist, but that they're being littered. Now, if an environmental organization wanted to propose a bill, and I wouldn't say I'm necessarily in support of this, that would increase fines as far as littering of plastic bags were concerned, then I think that would be a much better approach than an outright consumer ban and a government-imposed price on the alternative. I think that this is the wrong approach. They're misdiagnosing the problem. The problem is littering, if that's even that much of a problem, because I don't think plastic bags make up the majority of the litter in the state as it is. And I think we have a lot more pressing issues than talking about consumer bans. But littering is the issue on this.
Do you agree with that distinction between it's not just that plastic bags exist, it's that they get littered on public land?
Well, as I mentioned before, because of the nature of these plastic bags, and I guess I would go back to your previous statement and that they're durable. They're not. You could poll Oregonians, and I'd say over 50% of them have probably had a bag of groceries break in their hands because there was too much weight in there. They're nowhere near as durable as a paper bag or as a reusable bag, a cloth bag. So, like I said before, I think most Oregonians are pretty good stewards, and I don't think that they deliberately litter, because we live in a great state and we care about the beauty and the health of our environment. But because of the nature of these plastic bags, they blow in the wind, they fly out of the back of the truck, they take off out of your curbside recycling. Actually, if you've ever visited a dump, they have these massive fences up to catch these plastic bags from blowing away in the wind. And ultimately what ends up happening is local governments pay for the cost to gather these up and try and keep them contained in this landfill. And it's a major challenge.
It's funny because we live in Portland, we live in Oregon, one of the rainiest states, well, we live in Oregon at least, one of the rainiest states in the United States. And paper bags don't hold up that well in rain. And I would beg to differ that paper bags are I guess, stronger than plastic. And, I think surveys have shown that over 90% of the people that take plastic bags from their grocery store reuse them for a variety of things around the household, whether that be lining garbage cans in their bathroom, in their kitchen, picking up kitty litter, picking up dog poo, the works. 90% of those people reuse those bags for that purposes. And that is a significant thing to look at. But on the back end, the unintended consequences, if you ban plastic bags, grocery bags, then people are just going to buy plastic bags from the store to line their trash cans and pick up their dog poo and pick up their kitty litter. And what did you really accomplish in the end other than allowing government to have a dangerous overreach into our lives?
I wanted to respond to that real quickly because I think there is an important distinction. This current legislation would eliminate single-use plastic bags at the checkout stand. So you would still be able to get plastic bags at the produce section, at the meat section, to wrap your goods in those. Those, of course, could be used for the various purposes, such as you mentioned. And I acknowledge that most people do use these for other purposes. If you're a pet owner, a responsible pet owner, of course you're going to do the right thing and you're going to pick up that debris after your pet. But if you take your pet to the vet and get it its proper shots, there are some really great alternatives that are out there on the market that do biodegrade when they're in the landfill. And the same for lining your own trash can at home. So there's some options that are available in the marketplace that as a consumer we can make conscious choice about those and make something that's, but just because you put it in your garbage and it goes to the landfill doesn't mean it actually stays in the landfill, unfortunately. And that's something that people need to know.
And if we make that conscious decision and alternatives exist in the marketplace for lining trash cans and picking up dog poo, then why wouldn't you make that same argument for going into your grocery store when alternatives exist there?
Right now, you can bring your own. That's simple. And as you mentioned, there are some great stores that are already doing that. However, there's still, it's a big problem, and they're out there. And so, you've got this educational component, but at the same time, there's a lot of unnecessary, unneeded plastics that are entering the environment. There's always going to be people that, no matter what, they get away.
Todd, would you support taxpayer money being used to educate people more about littering, to make more of an intervention, like an educational intervention? Would you support that?
I'm pretty sure that's what environmental organizations serve to exist. I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago, I used to be much more involved in environmental organizations because they work towards educating the public around a perceived problem and work towards voluntary solutions to fixing that, whether that be picking up garbage and coming up with alternatives. Passing out reusable bags would be probably one solution as well. But they've shifted, and I don't know when this shift happened, and I don't know when it's become more of a magnitude towards lobbying government. But environmental organizations are now, their largest tool in their tool shed is lobbying government to impose force upon citizens and force them to do what they perceive to be right.
And to be fair, when it comes to lobbying government, I mean, industry does that play as well. I mean, a lot of the folks who testified at the hearing on this bill were from out of state. They were from the American Chemistry Council. They're from a bag recycling company. So there is all sorts of people lobby the government.
And that's the main reason why Cascade Policy Institute stands up for limiting government and limiting the power of politicians to respond to any lobbyists, whether they be American Chemistry Council, environmental organizations, or the works.
Gus, when it comes to paper bags and lobbying, by the way, I read that odds are when you use a paper bag in Oregon, it probably comes from a manufacturer in Oregon. Well, first of all, what is the environmental impact of a paper bag? Does it take more water and more resources to make a paper bag than it does a plastic bag?
Well, there's been some interesting studies that have came out along those lines. Some of them funded by the American Chemistry Council that have been very critical of their competitors in the paper bag manufacturing industry. You know, they basically made the assumption that plastic doesn't make its way into the waste stream as litter, which is, we know, not correct. They assume that roughly one paper bag translates to 1.5 plastic bags. Well, actually, one plastic bag, you can, fit about 2 to 3 times the amount in a paper bag. So there's some incorrect assumptions there as far as the amount of resources that are used. A big one in that assumption was the distance, in delivering these paper bags, excuse me. So as you mentioned, Oregon does manufacture paper bags, and in fact, just out in Beaverton, Oregon, International Paper has a manufacturing plant right there that employs about 300 Oregonians. And so one of the good things about paper bags is that it's a fully recyclable material, and so you can use it over and over and over again. So you can close that loop.
So you'd emphasize the positive point of that, which is it's an Oregon industry with Oregon jobs, apart from it may be something where they're lobbying state government, and there's kind of a conflict of interest there because they're benefiting from this bill.
I would argue, and this comes from my direct conversations with International Paper, that they're remaining neutral on this bill, and they're letting the process play its course. So, while they have come and testified at the hearings, I see it more as an educational, informative perspective, and that they're trying to let people know that this is something that actually Oregon-based jobs are attached to this, whereas the plastic bag manufacturers are not in the state of Oregon.
Okay, first of all, life cycle analysis. Scottish government came out with one that was the most comprehensive life cycle analysis out there, peer-reviewed the works, and it showed that paper bags use over twice the amount of energy, emit 4 times the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the process, and over 15 times the amount of waterborne pollutants. So if we're talking about environmental issues, paper bags probably aren't the right solution. Also, there was another study in 2007 that showed similar results, peer-reviewed by professors across the United States. So the environmental claims of paper bags being better or worse for the environment are questionable on both sides. Plastic, we don't want to see it in seabirds' mouths, but we don't want to see us using 10 times more energy or cutting down the trees in Oregon for paper bags either. And then the question of whether it creates jobs in Oregon is always a funny one to me, and it was brought up and it was advocated by a lot of legislators down there saying that this would create jobs. We have the paper bag industry and the international papers here in the state. Well, by that same economic logic, we should ban everything that doesn't originate or isn't produced in Oregon, and somehow Oregonians will be better off. And that is completely ridiculous. That makes no sense whatsoever. And to say the international paper does not have a hand in this bill is a little off base. Currently, the only paper company that provides 40% recycled material or more paper bags that's written into this bill happens to be International Paper. So to say that they don't have an advantage if this bill passes in some sort of way, or at least carved out a little bit of a profit for themselves, is wrong. And it's interesting to see environmental organizations team up with their enemies in many states, the paper industry. The ones that, if this bill passes, we could be seeing 1 million extra trees cut down in the state of Oregon to go into making these paper bags. So it's interesting. It's an interesting arrangement that I've seen with environmental organizations and big corporations.
Gus?
That's interesting, Todd. Like I've said all along, our first and foremost issue is to encourage people to bring their own reusable cloth bags. So, I'm not necessarily supporting paper bags, but I do acknowledge that there are organ-based jobs that are attached with those. And that's why I think that the 5-cent charge is an important reminder to bring your own reusable bag. If you forget it, well, it only costs you a nickel, and you can get your groceries that way. But I did want to come back to the jobs thing because, I know you're kind of skeptical of that, but one thing that hasn't came up yet today is the impacts to organ-based recyclers. So you send these materials to these material recovery centers in your curbside boxes. And some people still don't know that you can't put plastic bags in there, unfortunately. What ends up happening at these facilities is that they get about 1% of their overall volume is plastic films, plastic bags. And what ends up happening is that these entangle the sorting machines and cause major headaches and prohibit the real materials that are recyclable from getting actually recycled in those material recovery centers. So they estimate that they spend 20 to 30% of their labor costs just in dealing with these nuisance plastic bags. So for some businesses, they've estimated that that costs them as much as $30,000 to $40,000 per month. So when we talk about jobs, it's important to recognize that right now, organ-based jobs are wasting a lot of money dealing with these nuisance items of plastic bags in the waste stream. And there's a lot of money that could be better spent.
Now, by that same economic logic, that it increases labor costs, you could technically say that that increases jobs in that industry, and that would be the same logic you'd be using on the other end as far as increasing the cost of paper bags. So we've come out with an actual economic analysis on what this government-imposed price would do to Oregonians, and we've assessed it. It's a dynamic economic model that shows both job losses and job increases. And we have shown a net job loss for 2012 alone to almost 300 jobs in the state. With 10.4% unemployment and people struggling to make ends meet, imposing a charge that's going to cost millions of dollars, add millions of dollars to grocery bills for Oregonians, doesn't seem like the right direction to go in.
I'm glad you brought
fair, though, before you say something, you mentioned peer-reviewed research before.
That's
I assume that one wasn't in a peer-reviewed journal, the report you just cited.
We hired 2 economists from the Beacon Hill Institute out in Massachusetts. They used an economic model called the STAMP, State Tax Analysis Mapping Program, which has been peer-reviewed.
And the Beacon Hill Institute is very plain on their website about being a libertarian think tank, as is the Americans for Tax Reform, as is the Cascade Policy Institute, just to make sure our viewers know
Yes,
that.
we like to advocate for freedom, and we do not hide the fact that we are searching for individual rights and advancing individual rights for Oregonians.
And that's where the report came from, just to be clear. Yes.
And thanks for bringing that up, Jim, because I think that's an important point that often gets missed. It is important to note that at least 2 out of those 3 groups that you mentioned have come out in opposition of the bill. Very strategically timed, I'd add. Came out on the day that the bill had a hearing.
Is it? We all stand up for freedom. We all stand up that government doesn't involve ourselves in our lives.
I mean the economic analysis.
The timing was interesting, obviously politically motivated.
Yeah, of course.
But one thing that I would add is that I took a look at it on your website.
Yeah.
But I was a little bit disappointed because when I went to click on the links to explore the methodology, it went to a website that was still under construction.
That's
didn't
not
lead
true
me,
at all.
Actually,
I can send you those links. The methodology for the STAMP
sent them
model is
to me.
all over Google.
I looked, and it took me to a blank website where scientific information should be out there so that everyone can look at it and say, okay, clearly this is how these guys came to these conclusions.
It's interesting when we come back.
Hold on. Just go ahead and finish your statement.
How you came to these conclusions, what assumptions you made, how many people are going to be changing behaviors to bring their own reusable bags. And I came away pretty confused because I wasn't able to answer those questions. So, I know you've thrown around some numbers, 6 million, 14 million. Last time we talked, it was 20 million. With this high variability, I'm not getting a strong confidence in your numbers.
First of all, it's a range between 6 and 14 million, depending upon static or dynamic economic modeling. Those links are available online. I'll provide them for you again. We're completely open and transparent as far as our research is concerned. And it's interesting that we talk about money. When any study comes up, we talk about money. Is there money involved in your organization at the Surfrider Foundation? Do they pay you a salary, Gus?
Of course, and I would acknowledge that comes from my members.
How am I saying that you're not biased on some sort of issue? You can say that I am biased for the freedom and protecting individual rights of Oregonians.
Sure.
But aren't you showing some sort of bias? Do you not get
We all
paid
have
by
bias.
an industry? Okay.
I don't get paid by an industry. I get paid by our membership dues.
An environmental organization industry that is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States of America.
And to be fair, even if your economic analysis is sound, in general, economic issues like what stimulates, what decreases jobs is a abstract, complex notion that a lot of economists, very good ones, disagree on. Look at the stimulus package and how many people disagreed on that. So I don't think we'll get too much further on that specific issue. But that said, and as we run out of time, I want to give both of you an opportunity to kind of summarize kind of your final argument on why this bill is a good or bad idea. What is the take-home message here for the viewer, and who wants to go first?
Gus, you want to take it?
Sure. Well, for us, we have an opportunity here in Oregon to reduce a chronic source of environmental pollution that enters our oceans, clogs up our storm drains, which results in a significant cost to local governments, municipalities, workers in the state of Oregon at recycling facilities. Really, at the end of the day, it's about a simple change in consumer behavior to bring your own reusable bag to the store. It's as simple as that. We can all take part in this, feel good about our actions, and collectively, that does have a pretty significant impact for the state that we love and for the legacy that we lead.
Todd?
Cascade Policy Institute and myself believe that an outright consumer ban is not the proper role of government. And we also believe that environmental organizations as a whole have used or are continuing to use government to force the people to do what they believe is a perceived problem. We also believe that plastic bags can be considered a littering issue, but it's not that they exist. And ultimately, we do not believe it's the proper role of government to impose a price upon a consumer good that is an alternative to what they're banning. This is a dangerous overreach of government in our lives. And if we allow this to happen, it's the first step of many to decreasing individual rights and freedoms in Oregon.
And we'll leave it at that. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Gus Gates from the Surfrider Foundation and Todd Wynn from the Cascade Policy Institute. I'm Jim Winkle. Thanks for watching Population. See you next time. And the cameras are still rolling as the credits go.